Smite Hammerdin is easily the best build I've ever played in last Epoch, and it could be the best build of 0.9. Paladin gives you insanely good access to defenses. Need armor? You've got it. Need resistances? You've got it. Want some extra endurance? Well, it has that too. Oh, and you were wondering about that whole losing health thing? Yeah, that doesn't really happen for this build. You have so many sources of so much healing that any health you lose comes back almost instantly. Potions, those are for losers, and people who think they're going to die. You're not going to think you're going to die very often, and honestly, most of the time when I use a potion, it's because I stood in the big boss slam to see if it would one-shot me. Spoiler, it usually doesn't. When it comes to clear, your hammers spin around you and obliterate the entire screen. Throw down Javelin for even more DPS and healing, cause of course the build needed more healing. And if you want to cover a very large amount of distance, hold down shield charge and watch out for walls, they're the only thing that's going to get in your way. I've heard that if all you care about is pure single target, then the Javelin throw version might be a little bit higher DPS than the hammer throw version, but the hammer throw version clears much faster, and I find that most of my time spent is clearing as opposed to fighting bosses, so that's exactly what I'm min-maxed for. Now, before I get into a few more details about the build, I did want to point out one very important note. If you're going to play this build, you can't just make a new character and start it. You need to get the correct adorned Rye idols with a % chance to cast Smite when you hit with throwing attacks. Now ideally for the suffix, you want things like shred armor on throwing attack hit, or block effectiveness, really anything that's actually relevant to your build. I wouldn't play the build until you have at least 2 of these. Personally, I have 4 of them and it feels incredible, especially since I have 8%, 8%, 8%, and 9%, for a total of 33% chance to cast Smite when I hit something with a thrown hammer. But if you're looking for an excellent build on one of the best classes currently in last Epoch, at least as of a 0.9 multiplayer patch, then this is going to be a great choice for monoliths, and it's not too shabby on bossing either. Especially because if a boss has a bigger hitbox, that just means there's more of them to hit, and multiple hits means multiple smites. So without further ado, let's get into those skills a little bit. First up, we have Hammer Throw. This is what gets all of those juicy smite triggers. I'm going with Hammer Vortex to cause my hammers to orbit around me, which makes the build feel much better, especially when clearing. I just throw a few hammers, and then they spin, so I can charge through enemies triggering smites as I go. Now, in terms of other important things to have, I like getting a little bit of armor shred from Shattering Force, though you can also grab it on your weapon. Zeal is a really nice global buff. It's increased damage per stack up to 90% and increased crit chance up to 90%. Then over here I've got Ballista to reduce the mana cost, combined with Catapult and Avatar of the Spire, which is really just to get as many projectiles as possible on my hammer throw. Next up, I've got Smite itself. It's really important to get a couple of extra levels on Smite if you can, since that adds a significant portion of damage. Now I'm going Lightning Smite, which I'll explain a little bit more when I get to the gear. The important note here is I not only have Order of Lagan, but I've taken Unbalanced Scale as well because the lightning bolts are very noticeable when clearing, and in some cases when enemies are stacked together on a boss fight, can significantly increase your single target. The other thing that's really important is Sacrifice. It causes your Smite to deal 250% more damage, but consume a percentage of your current health, and this does apply even when triggered. So I make sure to grab Atonement so that Sacrifice costs less health. This build has so much healing that I'll barely even notice it. And then I've got Conviction. It's always being triggered, so cast speed doesn't matter. I could take Deep Impact, but I felt like the base crit was more important than the crit multi. This will ultimately come down to your gear. Mine's pretty okay, but not the best. I've just been playing for a few days here. Then next up, we have Holy Aura. Right now I'm using it to get Shelter from a Storm for a little bit more block, but you could always go over to Expedite for more damage as well. Then for the rest of the nodes, it really is just about getting some base attack speed, crit chance, and crit multi. The good old Paladin tax is certainly alive and thriving. For Javelin, it's pretty simple. Throw down a Javelin, Javelin sticks to enemies, and cast Smite on them. This not only gives you a secondary source of damage if you're running around dodging boss mechanics, but it gives you a really juicy amount of healing. This is scaled by your healing effectiveness. And of course, even more base crit for your Smite, so those should crit 100% of the time. Then finally, Sigils of Hope. Since this is a great utility skill, I'm using it to get some armor, doubling the healing, though if you're playing with a group, I wouldn't advise this, and of course empowering sigils for damage plus Decree of Flames for base damage. Getting up to 12 flat fire damage isn't super insane, but it is 12 flat fire damage if it's going to be scaled by a lot of your other multipliers. Next up, I began in Sentinel, since this is my base class, went into Fearless for some health regen, a little bit of Juggernaut. If I needed more Void Resistance, I'd have more points in Juggernaut. If I need less Void Resistance, I'll have less points in Juggernaut. From there, always grab Gladiator. At least 1 point here gives you the 3% block chance, which is, of course, more defense, as this build has quite a lot of block effectiveness. From there, I'm grabbing Armor Clad. Reducing the damage I take is good, it means I can stand in more stuff, and a little bit of armor doesn't hurt. Then Relentless for the increased damage. From there, I don't actually take anything else here. I skip all the way to the end and grab Mail Crusher for 120% increased damage. This applies to anything you do, so long as you're wielding a scepter, which I am. Now, if you had a sword or axe instead, you could absolutely get Blade Master. Blade Master would be great for increasing your hammer throw speed. This increases the damage dealt by Smite. From there, I've got a couple of 1-point wonders in Forge Guard. I'm not honestly sure that Battle Hardened is the right play. I just wanted to play with it to make myself tankier when I'm getting hit. 2% block is really all I'm going for from Steel Aegis. Over in Void Knight, I'm really just grabbing a little bit of extra crit multi, along with capping my Void and Fizz res. Then most of my points are of course in the Paladin tree. Conviction is really nice because you get 16% Lightning Pen. Due to the amulet that I'll talk about later, you don't get too much Lightning Pen from gear, so this is a lifesaver. It also kind of scales everything you do. From there, another 1-point wonder in Honor, and a 1-point wonder in Holy Symbol, to get Heaven Fire. This is 30 flat spell damage. The spell damage is adaptive, so it's going to go right over to Lightning and benefit from all my other multipliers. Then I've got Valor for some health and healing effectiveness. There's several very good utility options between Valor, Prayer, and Dedication. Potentially even Defiance if you need Ellie res. Just take whatever strikes you. I've also got Holy Symbol here because I wanted the Necrotic res. The more I have on the tree, the less I need on gear. Sanctuary Guardian is a very large amount of armor, along with even more spell damage while holding a shield. Then I'm grabbing Shield Wall for a little bit of block chance because I didn't have dodge anyway. Holy Precision is spell crit and crit multi since Smite is converted over to Lightning. Faith Armor for more armor because I wanted to be tanky and get pretty close to crit avoidance cap. Prayer Aegis is probably something you could cut, but Haste on Heal isn't terrible since you'll always be healing whenever you're below your endurance threshold. And then finally, I took the Light of Rye for a little more damage and move speed. Honestly, I'm more interested in the move speed, though defensively, Reverence of Duality is a great choice as well. Now, earlier I mentioned that you're probably not going to be leveling as the Smite version. At least, not unless you farm the relics with a different build. So what I leveled with was simple old Hammer Throw. Due to having a large amount of flat adaptive damage available on both rings, your necklace, and your belt, it's pretty easy to play Hammer Throw these days. You just have to focus on getting increases wherever you can, such as on weapons. And while that build wasn't perfect, it was certainly more than enough to get me into Empowered Monos, and more than enough to help me farm everything I needed. I just went out of my way to target the idol drops specifically, and I had a couple in no time. Once I swapped over, the other two were even faster, due to just how quickly this build farms. But with that said, let's get into the gear. So, like I mentioned before, I'm using the 4 idols with chance to cast Smite when you hit with throwing attacks. Then for the others, I was just going for health, armor, resistances, anything that could really fill in. For my weapon, I'm using a scepter with as much lightning damage as I could get. Lightning spell damage and leech. This is yet another healing source, because why not? And the suffixes are, well, actually garbage. This should be something like slow and shock. I just don't have a good one. For my helmet, the attunement is good. That will scale my smite. The health is good. The armor is good. The mana is useless. This should be void damage, void spell damage. For your amulet, I strongly advise getting a devotion. Not only does this give you spell damage with smite per 5 missing mana, you should be missing 100 to 200 mana on most boss fights about halfway through. It gives you endurance, healing effectiveness, lightning damage, and lightning pen, pretty much everything you need. If you can get a legendary with this, then that is an incredible piece. But if you can get this at all, I would definitely go lightning smite over fire smite. My shield, I really just went for block effectiveness. That's all it has. I guess the poison res is pretty good. I don't think the fizz res is doing anything for me. My shield probably should be replaced, but my build works fine, so I'm not gonna. Then my chest piece, I've got attunement, void damage, health, and void res. If you need a void res, this is perfect. If not, just grab any old suffix that you actually need. For rings, I've got some mana regen. This makes the build feel much better. You want to essentially be mana neutral with your hammer throw, which for me was this exact amount of mana regen. Then throwing attack speed, because the faster you throw your hammers, the more smites you can trigger. Health regeneration and health. I did seal the throwing attack physical damage and throwing attack mana cost, because that makes my hammer throw far more mana efficient. Try to get that sealed on both rings, since you only need tier 1. Now, because I don't need very many resistances, I am in fact a paladin, I pretty much just have health here. Realistically, I think my best in slot would probably be hybrid health and crit avoid here instead, since I think I'm just slightly short on crit avoid at the moment. But either way, it's still pretty good, and I do have another belt with 55% crit avoid if I ever run any crit maps. For my other ring, spell damage, of course, helps to scale smite. Throwing damage, sadly, I didn't get to seal it because I had to get rid of the int. Then health, and the other suffix is dead. That should absolutely be something else, maybe endurance, so that I could get crit avoid elsewhere. Either way, just look for good stats that are beneficial for your build. Rings, I'd really focus more on the prefixes than the suffixes. Then for gloves, I found that the increased area for area skills was surprisingly helpful. I didn't really think I was going to like it. But between that and the throwing attack speed, the build feels really good. I've got 21 endurance here, which helps me get to endurance cap, plus health, because I don't want to die. As it turns out, dying's not super fun. And then I've got these boots, which have move speed, attunement, health, and armor. I have found armor to be a very clutch stat, and stacking it in a couple places is great. Again, you don't really need specific prefixes and suffixes on most of these items. I guess for things like the chest and helmet, yeah, the prefixes are item specific. For the rings, they're item specific too. A lot of the suffixes, go for health, go for armor, fill in your resists, try to get crit avoid, and you're pretty much good. And finally, on your relic, the most important thing is the +2 level to smite. Everything else is secondary to that, and I like applying frailty on hit. This build hits so often that you're always going to be applying frailty. It feels really good on bosses, but maybe that's just because I like to stand in stuff. Now, for my blessings, honestly, a lot of them don't matter very much. The ones that do are the Grand Mysteries of the Deep. For Lightning Shred, you'd need Lightning Shred somewhere else if you don't have this. Grand Bones of Eternity for block effect from Age of Winter, and Grand Body of Obsidian from Spirits of Fire for as much armor as you can get. As for the rest, maybe they'd be relevant at some point. Realistically, Grand Resolve of Humanity is something I probably should have replaced, but I got tired of farming Reign of Dragons for something better, even if most of my resists are over 20% over cap. So if you're looking for a Paladin build that feels great to play, is capable of farming content extremely quickly, and is relatively tanky while fighting bosses, I can strongly suggest this one. Will it be able to face tank T4 Julera or Orbis with every mod? Maybe not quite. But it can absolutely tank a lot of damage on Orbis, and T3 Julera wasn't too bad at all. But having taken the character to level 100 and filled out most of the important pieces, at this point it would just be the sort of polishing that I don't really have any incentive to do, because to me, the build's already solved. I know what it can do, I know what it can't do, and I know that for the things that it can do, it feels absolutely awesome. Personally, I've had a ton of fun playing Smite Hammerdin. It is absolutely the best build that I've played. And if you're the sort of person who likes playing characters with a really strong visual aesthetic, it is mesmerizing, watching all of the smites go off and having lightning rain from the sky, obliterating your foes. While clearing, the build is especially effective at dealing with enemies that are grouped up, so if there's any lone tanky monster, instead of trying to spin your hammers through it, maybe just throw a javelin at it and then forget about the problem, because javelin usually lasts long enough to kill anything I throw it at. On bosses, make sure to toss the javelin down on the boss, pop your aura, as long as all your sigils are up, you're good to spin, and don't worry too much about most of the circles on the ground, you can stand in them and they probably won't kill you. While I do think at this point my gear ended up being quite nice, the build doesn't feel like it has a super high bar to entry. You need at least 2 of the idols, but once you get it, the rest is relatively easy. In fact, I found the damage to be pretty good, even when I was wearing my original gear, which had been fully set up for attack-based hammer throw. And if a spell build can do pretty decently on an attack build setup, especially when before I had been building into void damage rather than lightning damage, I'd say that's a mark of a really strong build. Now, I'm going to be playing one other build and releasing a video about that in the near future. So if this isn't quite your cup of tea and you're looking to play something else, do be sure to get subscribed, maybe while you're down there leave a like. Or if you're wondering what are my thoughts on the 0.9 patch for last Epoch now that I've had some time to play it for myself, well, that'll be coming sometime in the near future, so if it interests you, do be sure to ring that notification bell so that you can see when I upload it. But now I'm curious, have you played Smite Hammerdin? Have you maybe played Disintegrating Aura Hammerdin? Do you prefer Paladin or Void Knight? And if not, does this look like an awesome build that you'd love to try? Let me know some of those thoughts down in the comments below. If you want to watch something else, then YouTube will have a recommendation on screen right now, or you can head up to the video card and check out another video where I give my thoughts on the trade situation in last Epoch. That'll also be down in the description below, along with some other helpful videos like how to make a loot filter. Personally, I had quite a lot of fun coming back to last Epoch for the multiplayer streamer invitational, and I'm enjoying the preview of patch 0.9. But again, more thoughts about that coming soon. For now, thank you for watching, I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.